500 years ago, a king of England died violently on a battlefield. His crown was taken, his dynasty collapsed, and then something far stranger happened. His body vanished. Not into legend, not into myth, into real, physical uncertainty. This is not a story about whether Richard III was good or evil. It's about how a human being, a crowned king, can be erased so completely that history itself loses track of where he went. Records say his corpse was dragged through the streets, stripped of dignity, displayed like a warning, then buried quickly, quietly, as if everyone wanted the problem to disappear. And for a while, it did. Centuries passed, buildings rose, churches fell, stories replaced evidence. People became certain without ever being correct. At some point, England stopped asking where Richard III was buried because it thought it already knew. But the truth was simpler, darker, and far more uncomfortable. The body was never lost. It was never thrown into a river. It was never swept away by time. It was left behind, under stone, under concrete, under a place no one ever looks down. This is a story about how history can lie without meaning to, how one mistake can harden into fact, and how, after 5 centuries, a missing king was finally found, beneath an ordinary parking lot. Richard III didn't just die at Bosworth. His death created a problem that had to be solved fast. The man who killed him needed legitimacy, not sympathy, and dead kings have a habit of becoming martyrs. So the body became a message, dragged across the field, hauled into Leicester, stripped, bruised, and displayed so no one could pretend he might return. This wasn't cruelty, it was strategy. The crowd needed to see that the war was over and that the old order was finished. When the display was done, the solution was silence. No grand tomb, no royal ceremony, just a hurried burial inside a small Franciscan church called Grey Friars, placed out of the way, away from pilgrims and politics. Officially, the records said he was buried there. Unofficially, everyone wanted the chapter closed, and for decades it was. But burials like this are fragile. They rely on memory, on walls staying upright, on institutions surviving power. When the Tudors consolidated control, memory became optional. Richard's grave existed, but it didn't matter. No one was protecting it, no one was preserving it. It wasn't sacred ground, it was a loose end, and loose ends don't stay visible for long. This is how history starts to slip, not with fire or violence, but with indifference. A king reduced to a logistical inconvenience, a body placed where it could be forgotten, and a mistake waiting for time to finish the job. Nothing here was accidental, and nothing about forgetting was ever neutral. History didn't lose Richard III. It dismantled him. 40 years after his burial, England tore itself apart in a quieter, more permanent way, not with swords but with paperwork and orders sealed in wax. Henry VIII turned against the Catholic Church, and monasteries across the country were shut down, stripped, and demolished. Grey Friars didn't fall because anyone cared about Richard. It fell because power was rearranging the landscape. Stone by stone, the church disappeared. The walls came down, the floor was ripped apart, graves were disturbed, markers destroyed, and memory scattered with the rubble. Whatever once identified Richard's resting place no longer existed. But here's the dangerous part. The ground didn't vanish. The body didn't move. Only the context was erased. The land was sold. A mansion rose over the site. Gardens covered what used to be sacred ground. To the people living there, it was just property. To history, it was a blind spot. And blind spots invite fiction. For a time, the exact location of Richard's grave was still known. Local officials understood what lay beneath their feet. A replacement monument quietly marked the spot. No ceremony, no crowds, just enough to say someone remembered. But monuments are fragile things. They depend on relevance. When relevance fades, markers vanish. By the early 17th century, nothing visible remained. No church, no marker, no reminder. Only empty ground and unanswered questions. This is how historical truth collapses, not with denial, but with layers. One generation builds over the last. The next forgets why it mattered. Eventually, absence becomes permission. permission to guess, permission to invent, permission to replace evidence with a story that feels complete. And once that happens, the truth doesn't disappear. It gets buried alive, under concrete, under routine, under the assumption that history never checks itself. By 1611, silence demanded an answer. England wanted closure, and closure often arrives before truth. That's when John Speed stepped in. He was a respected historian, a trusted mapmaker, and people believed him. Speed went to Leicester searching for Richard III's grave and found nothing. No church, no marker, just empty land. Instead of questioning why it was gone, he explained it away. Speed confused two similarly named religious sites and never noticed. From that mistake, a story formed. He claimed Richard's body had been ripped from its grave and dumped beneath a nearby bridge. It was dramatic, it was violent, and it felt final. The problem was simple. Speed had gone to the wrong place. Grey friars and black friars were not the same, but his authority made them interchangeable. The error spread faster than doubt. People repeated it because it solved the discomfort of not knowing. Over time, repetition replaced evidence. The bridge became accepted truth. A plaque marked the spot. When bones later surfaced in the river, belief did the rest. No one asked hard questions. No one rechecked the map. A single mistake, sealed with confidence, rewrote centuries of history. From that moment on, Richard III wasn't missing. By the 19th century, the lie had fully hardened. Schoolbooks repeated it. Guides pointed to it. Visitors stood at Bow Bridge believing they were standing over a king. This is what false certainty looks like. No conspiracy, no cover-up, just comfort. It was easier to believe the story than to reopen the wound. A plaque was installed, turning assumption into stone. And when a skeleton was pulled from the river nearby, the conclusion was immediate. This must be him. Evidence was no longer required because belief had already decided. But something was wrong. The details never lined up. The river shifted over centuries. The bridge had been rebuilt. The injuries didn't match battle accounts. None of it mattered. The story survived because it was convenient. Meanwhile, the real grave sat untouched, untested, ignored. The mayor's mansion that once marked the site was demolished. New buildings replaced it. Streets cut through old gardens. Layers of concrete sealed the ground like a lid. By the 20th century, even skeptics had nowhere left to look. Grey Friars was gone from memory and from maps. The myth won by default. This is the most dangerous moment in any investigation. Not when evidence is missing, but when curiosity dies. When everyone agrees, no one checks. When everyone knows the answer, the question disappears. Richard III didn't vanish because history was cruel. He vanished because certainty is comfortable, and comfort is stronger than truth. And once buried, lies wait patiently until someone is brave enough again. 500 years after Richard III was buried, the myth finally ran into asphalt. Modern Leicester had no room for medieval ghosts. Office blocks, streets, and utilities pressed down where Grey Friars once stood. What survived wasn't a church or a monument. It was a parking lot, painted lines, faded numbers, the kind of place no one associates with kings. That's where Philippa Langley arrived in the early 2000s, carrying not authority, not funding, but persistence. She wasn't an academic gatekeeper. She was an outsider asking an impolite question. What if everyone was wrong? Langley returned to maps others had skimmed past. She layered centuries like fingerprints, aligning property lines, gardens, roads, and vanished walls. The picture that emerged was uncomfortable. The Bow Bridge story didn't just lack proof, it contradicted the ground itself. The Grey Friars site wasn't gone. It was buried under daily routine. A patch of open land remained, overlooked because it looked ordinary. When Langley stood there, she felt the weight of probability, not magic. Churches ran east to west. Graves clustered near the altar. If Richard was ever there, the odds narrowed fast. Still, odds don't dig. Permission does. Years passed. Doubt followed her everywhere. Funding was thin. Time was thinner. When approval finally came, it came with limits. A few trenches, a few days, no guarantees. The plan was surgical. Cut narrow lines where a church should be, miss by a few feet, and history stays silent. This wasn't treasure hunting, it was risk management, and once the machine started, there was no dramatic reveal, no music cue, no announcement, just soil peeling back layers of forgetting. The clock was running. If the ground said nothing, the myth would win again. Silence would decide everything before curiosity had another chance to intervene at all. On August 25th, the dig began. Exactly 527 years after Richard III was lowered into the ground, heavy machinery peeled back the surface of the parking lot. Expectations were low by design. Archaeology is slow. Finds take weeks, sometimes months. This site had days, hours. Failure was the default outcome. The first trench cut through modern debris, then older soil, then something wrong. Human bone, not scattered, not dumped, placed. Within 6 hours, the outline of a skeleton emerged, lying where a church choir would have stood. The position was careless, almost disrespectful, as if speed mattered more than ceremony. Then the damage appeared. The skull was shattered in multiple places, consistent with close-range blows. No healing, no mercy. This was not rumor. This was violence frozen in bone. As the spine was uncovered, it curved sharply to one side. Severe scoliosis. One shoulder would have been visibly higher than the other. The very trait used for centuries to mock Richard as a hunchback was suddenly anatomical fact. But discovery creates danger. Finding a skeleton proves nothing if it can't survive scrutiny. Plenty of bodies die violently. Plenty are buried poorly. The team slowed down. Measurements replaced excitement. Every scrape mattered. The location, the injuries, the deformity. Each detail tightened the circle but didn't close it. If they were wrong, this would be remembered as coincidence. If they were right, history was about to be forced to answer for itself. And once asked, it would not stay silent again. Finding a body is not solving a case. It's opening one. From the moment the bones were lifted, the question shifted from where to who. The injuries matched battle accounts, but history doesn't convict on resemblance. Science had to take the stand. First came radiocarbon dating. The results were unsettling. The dates skewed older than 1485, old enough to sink the theory entirely. For a moment, the room went quiet. Then the diet appeared. Isotopes told a story of heavy seafood consumption, the kind reserved for elites with access to the coast and the table. Fish ages bones. Correct for that, and the timeline snapped back into place. Next came DNA, the most fragile thread of all. Centuries erase bloodlines. Names change. Fathers vanish from records. The team followed the mothers. Mitochondrial DNA passes quietly, generation to generation, untouched by surnames or titles. The trail led through 16 women to a modern man who never asked to be part of this, Michael Ibsen. If a single link was wrong, the case collapsed. So they found another line. Independent, female, separate. The sequences matched. Not perfectly by chance, but precisely by inheritance. Doubt didn't disappear. It tightened. Each test removed an escape route. Each result closed a door. This was no longer archaeology chasing a legend. It was evidence assembling a verdict. And verdicts don't care about stories people prefer. They care about what survives scrutiny when nothing else is left. History was about to be named, measured, confirmed, recorded forever. In the end, Richard III did not return as a legend. He returned as a set of measurements, a DNA sequence, a curved spine, and a timeline corrected by science. No speeches, no redemption arc, just a name restored to a body that had been mislabeled for 5 centuries. That's the part that should make us uncomfortable. This story isn't really about a medieval king. It's about how easily certainty replaces truth. One wrong assumption, repeated long enough, became accepted fact, not because it was proven, but because it was convenient. And when convenience wins, curiosity dies. The lesson here isn't historical, it's modern. We live surrounded by stories that feel complete, answers that feel settled, narratives no one thinks to question anymore. History didn't fail Richard III out of malice. It failed him because no one bothered to look down. It took an outsider, limited funding, and uncomfortable questions to expose a mistake that had hardened into tradition. That should worry us, because the same mechanism still works today. Facts don't disappear when they're buried. They wait, under concrete, under routine, under our assumptions. This case reminds us that truth doesn't need belief. It needs verification. And sometimes, the most important discoveries aren't found by chasing something exotic, but by questioning what everyone else already knows. If this story made you rethink how history is written, shared, or trusted, then it's worth passing on. Like the video, share it with someone who enjoys true crime and dark history, and subscribe for more investigations into the moments where myth collapses and evidence finally speaks. Because the past isn't silent. We just have to be willing to listen.